The sound of forced laughter cut through the Christmas dinner chatter like shattered glass. My sister Emma's voice rang out across her grandmother's dining room, dripping with theatrical amusement as she gestured dramatically at me with her wine glass. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Oh, please, not another one of Sarah's war fairy tales, Emma announced to the table full of relatives, her perfectly manicured fingernails tapping against the crystal stemware. Did I ever tell you guys about the time she claimed she single-handedly saved an entire village? Or wait, no, my personal favorite is when she said she defused bombs with her bare hands. The room fell uncomfortably quiet, except for Emma's continued giggling. I mean, come on, look at her. Does she look like some kind of action hero to you? I sat there in my simple sweater and jeans, my hands steady on my coffee cup, watching my older sister perform for our extended family. Emma had always been the golden child, the one with the MBA from Harvard, the corner office in Manhattan, the designer everything. She commanded rooms with her confidence and her checkbook. And right now, she was commanding this one at my expense. Emma, our cousin Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Maybe we should— No, let me finish. She waved him off, her voice getting louder with each sip of wine. You know what the funniest part is? She's been telling these ridiculous stories for 3 years now, and not once has she shown us a single photo, a single piece of proof. Nothing. Because they're all made up. She turned to me directly, her eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. Aren't they, Sarah? Just admit it. You never deployed anywhere. You probably never even left the base. The silence stretched like a taut wire about to snap. My grandmother's antique clock ticked steadily from the mantel. I could feel every pair of eyes at the table on me, waiting for my response, waiting to see if I would defend myself or crumble under Emma's assault. I took a slow sip of my coffee, set the cup down with deliberate precision, and smiled. Because I knew something Emma didn't know yet, something that was about to change everything. My phone buzzed once against the table. The caller ID made my heart skip, but I kept my expression neutral. Excuse me, I said quietly, standing up. I need to take this. Emma rolled her eyes. Oh, let me guess, another one of your military buddies calling to back up your stories? I walked to the kitchen, my hands steady as I answered the call. Hello, General Morrison? The voice on the other end was crisp, authoritative, unmistakably military. Sergeant Major Chen, I hope I'm not interrupting your holiday. Not at all, sir. Actually, your timing is perfect. Good. I wanted to personally inform you that the Pentagon has approved your nomination. The ceremony will be in 2 weeks. I know it's been a long road, but you've more than earned this recognition. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of validation I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Thank you, General. That means everything. Sarah, Emma's voice called from the dining room, saccharine sweet with mock concern. Everything okay? Your imaginary colonel isn't having an emergency, is he? General Morrison's voice sharpened on the other end. Was that someone questioning your service record, Sergeant Major? My sister has some doubts about my deployment stories, sir. There was a pause, then a sound I'd rarely heard from the general. A low chuckle. Would you mind putting me on speaker, Sergeant Major? I think it's time we cleared up some misconceptions. I walked back into the dining room, my phone held high, the speaker button clearly visible. The room fell silent as I set it in the center of the table. Good evening, everyone. This is General Robert Morrison, United States Army, calling from the Pentagon. I understand there's been some question about Sergeant Major Chen's service record. Emma's face went white. The wineglass trembled in her hand. Let me be crystal clear, the general continued, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. Sergeant Major Sarah Chen is one of the most decorated non-commissioned officers I've had the privilege to serve alongside. Her actions during Operation Desert Shield not only saved American lives, but prevented what could have been an international incident. The bomb disposal work she performed in Kandahar was nothing short of heroic, and her tactical leadership during the siege of Forward Operating Base Martinez is required at the Command and Staff College. The color drained completely from Emma's face. Our cousin Jake's mouth hung open.
Grandmother's hands flew to cover her heart. Furthermore, General Morrison's voice grew even more authoritative. In 2 weeks, Sergeant Major Chen will be receiving the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor. This is in addition to the Bronze Star with V device, 2 Purple Hearts, and the Combat Action Badge she already holds. Emma set her wine glass down with shaking hands. I didn't... Ma'am. The general's voice turned cold. I don't know who you are, but I suggest you show more respect for someone who has bled for this country. Sergeant Major Chen, I'll see you at the ceremony. Give my regards to your family. The line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening. I picked up my phone, slipped it into my pocket, and looked around the table at the faces staring back at me. Emma couldn't meet my eyes. Her perfect composure had crumbled completely. Well, I said quietly, sitting back down, I suppose we should talk about how I really spent those missing years. You probably want to know how we got here, how the quiet younger sister became the woman who just had a Pentagon general verify her war stories to a room full of shocked relatives, how the girl Emma used to call Mouse became someone who earned medals for valor that most people only see in movies. So let me take you back to the beginning, to the day that changed everything between Emma and me forever. Growing up, Emma and I were as different as 2 sisters could be. She was 3 years older, brilliant in school, and possessed a confidence that seemed to radiate from her very pores. While I was reading in corners and avoiding attention, Emma was commanding the stage in school plays, leading student government, and collecting academic awards like other kids collected baseball cards. Our parents adored her. How could they not? She was everything they had dreamed of in a daughter. Beautiful, accomplished, destined for greatness. I was the afterthought, the second child who came along when Emma was already establishing herself as the family star. Why can't you be more like your sister? Became the soundtrack of my childhood. Emma got the lead in the school musical. I joined stage crew. Emma made varsity cheerleading as a sophomore. I ran cross-country alone, mile after mile, with only my thoughts for company. Emma dated the quarterback. I buried myself in books about history and military strategy. By the time I was 16, I had accepted my role as Emma's shadow. She was the sun, bright and commanding attention wherever she went. I was content to be the moon, reflecting her light and staying safely in the background. But shadows, I learned, can hide more than most people realize. The first crack in our family's perfect narrative came during my senior year. Emma was finishing her sophomore year at an Ivy League school, majoring in business, and already talking about her summer internship at a Fortune 500 company. I was applying to colleges, mostly state schools, nothing particularly impressive. Sarah's always been more practical, my mother would say when friends asked about my plans, the word practical carrying the weight of diplomatic disappointment. What they didn't know was that I had already made a different choice. While Emma was building her resume with prestigious internships, I was sitting in a military recruiter's office signing papers that would take me down a path none of them could imagine. I kept it secret for months. The physical training, the preparation, and the commitment ceremony. I told them I had a job lined up after graduation, which was technically true. I just didn't mention that the job involved combat boots and deployments to places they couldn't pronounce. The night before I left for basic training, I finally told them. Emma was home for summer break, regaling us with stories from her internship, when I cleared my throat and made my announcement. I enlisted in the Army. The words dropped into the dining room like a grenade with the pin pulled. My father set down his fork. My mother's face went pale. Emma stared at me like I had just announced I was joining the circus. You did what? Emma's voice was sharp with disbelief. I leave for Fort Benning tomorrow morning. This is a joke, right? Emma looked around the table for confirmation that I wasn't serious. Sarah, you can't be serious. You're barely athlete material. Emma, my mother warned, but her heart wasn't in it. She was too shocked to manage her usual diplomatic interventions. What?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Emma threw her hands up. I'm just saying what we're all thinking. Sarah's never been physical, she's never been aggressive, she's never even been in a fight. And now she wants to go play Army? My father found his voice. Sweetheart, are you sure about this? You could still go to college, get a degree, have a real career. Like Emma? I asked quietly. Well, yes. Emma's got a bright future ahead of her. Corporate law, maybe investment banking. She's got options. Emma leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, studying me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. I just don't understand why you would choose this. It's so beneath you. That word hung in the air. Beneath me. As if service to country was somehow a step down from the corporate ladder Emma was so eager to climb. Maybe I want to do something that matters, I said. And what I'm doing doesn't matter? Emma's voice rose. Building a career? Contributing to the economy? That doesn't matter? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Sarah? Because it sounds like you're looking down on the rest of us for not playing soldier. The argument that followed was one of the worst fights Emma and I had ever had. She accused me of being naive, of running away from real responsibility, of choosing the easy path because I couldn't compete in the real world. I accused her of being selfish, of only caring about money and status, of never understanding what sacrifice meant. We went to bed angry that night, and I left the next morning while she was still asleep. Basic training was everything Emma predicted it would be, and nothing like she imagined. Yes, it was physically demanding. Yes, it pushed me beyond limits I didn't know I had. But it also revealed strength I never knew existed inside me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being compared to Emma. My success or failure depended entirely on my own actions, my own choices, my own determination. No one cared that my sister was brilliant or beautiful or destined for corporate greatness. They only cared whether I could keep up, whether I could be counted on, whether I had what it took to earn the uniform. And slowly, painfully, proudly, I discovered that I did. The letters from home were sporadic at first. My parents wrote dutiful updates about neighborhood news and weather. Emma didn't write at all for the first 6 months. When she finally did, it was a brief note congratulating me on graduating basic training, with a postscript that felt more like a challenge than encouragement. Hope you're finding what you're looking for out there. I found more than I was looking for. I found purpose. I found belonging. I found out that the quiet girl who had lived in Emma's shadow was capable of leadership, of courage, of making split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death for the people under her command. My first deployment came 18 months after I enlisted. Afghanistan. A place that existed in news headlines and political debates. But until you breathed the dust and felt the heat and heard the sound of incoming mortars, it was just an abstract concept. Emma called me before I left. "So, you're really doing this?" she said, her voice carrying across the ocean of distance that had grown between us. "I'm really doing this. Are you scared?" It was the first vulnerable question she had asked me in years. For a moment, I heard my big sister in her voice, not the corporate executive she was becoming. "Terrified," I admitted. "Then why go?" "Because someone has to. And because I'm good at this, Emma. I'm really good at this." There was a long pause. "I still don't understand it. But be safe, okay? I may not understand your choices, but you're still my little sister." That conversation stayed with me through the deployment, through the sleepless nights and the adrenaline-soaked missions and the moments when training took over and muscle memory kept me alive. Emma might not understand, but she still cared. That had to be enough. The deployment changed me in ways I couldn't have anticipated. I led missions. I made decisions. I saved lives and took responsibility for others in ways that tested every assumption I had ever made about myself. The quiet girl who used to hide in Emma's shadow discovered she could command respect in the most dangerous places on Earth. I also discovered I was good at the technical aspects of military service in ways that surprised everyone, including myself. Explosive ordnance disposal became my specialty. Bombs, IEDs, the kind of devices that could vaporize a convoy or level a building.
I had steady hands and a mind that could work through complex problems under pressure. Skills that would have been useless in Emma's world, but were literally life and death valuable in mine. When I came home from that first deployment, I had stories. Real stories. Stories about defusing bombs while under fire. Stories about leading convoys through hostile territory. Stories about making decisions that saved American lives and prevented international incidents. But I also had something else. The knowledge that these stories would sound impossible to people who had never lived them. Emma was waiting at the airport when I landed. She looked older, more polished, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. Her hug was genuine, but brief, and I could feel her studying me as we walked to her car. "You look different," she said, as we drove through familiar streets that somehow felt foreign after months in the desert. "I am different. Tell me about it. What was it really like?" So I did. I told her about the heat and the dust and the constant awareness that danger could come from anywhere at any time. I told her about the people I served with, the bonds forged in conditions civilians couldn't imagine. I told her about the technical challenges of bomb disposal, the split-second decisions, the lives saved and the ones lost. Emma listened, asked questions, seemed genuinely interested. For a while, I thought maybe the distance between us was closing. Then she started telling other people my stories. At first, it seemed harmless. She would introduce me at parties as her war hero sister and ask me to tell the story about the IED or the convoy or the time I had to defuse 3 bombs in one day. I obliged because I thought she was proud of me, finally seeing me as something other than her underachieving little sister. But gradually, I began to notice something else in her voice when she introduced these stories. A subtle tone of skepticism, as if she were presenting them as entertainment rather than truth. She would smile a little too widely, glance at her friends a little too knowingly, frame my experiences as if they were tall tales rather than lived reality. "Sarah has the most amazing imagination," she said once, laughing as she finished recounting one of my stories to her corporate friends. "She could write screenplays with adventures like these." The word imagination hit me like a physical blow. She didn't believe me. My own sister thought I was making it up? I confronted her that night. "Do you think I'm lying?" Emma looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Lying? Sarah, that's a strong word. Do you believe the stories I've told you?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I had my answer. "I think," she said carefully, "that sometimes when people go through intense experiences, their memories can get enhanced. It's not lying exactly. It's just that things seem more dramatic in retrospect than they probably were in the moment. Enhanced. I'm not saying you didn't serve. I'm not saying you didn't have some interesting experiences. I'm just saying that maybe some of the details got a little bigger in the telling." I stared at my sister, this woman I had looked up to my entire life, and realized she saw me exactly the same way she always had. As someone who needed to exaggerate, to make things up, to create drama because my real life wasn't interesting enough on its own. "Emma, I have photos. I have commendations. I have documentation of everything I've told you."
Of course you do. I'm not questioning that you served. I'm just saying that your role might have been more administrative than you remember. Administrative, as if the Bronze Star with V device I earned was for filing paperwork efficiently. That was the beginning of the end of our relationship as I had known it. From that point forward, every story I told was met with polite skepticism. Every experience I shared was filtered through Emma's assumption that I was exaggerating or misremembering or outright fabricating. When I got promoted, she congratulated me, but added comments about how easy advancement was in the military compared to the corporate world. When I earned additional commendations, she made jokes about participation trophies. When I told her about my second deployment, she listened with the kind of patient smile you give a child telling you about their imaginary friend. The worst part was that she didn't keep her skepticism private. At family gatherings, at social events, whenever my military service came up, Emma would subtly undermine the reality of my experiences. She never called me a liar directly, but she framed my stories as entertainment, as creative embellishment, as the amusing fantasies of a sister with an overactive imagination. Other family members began to pick up on her cues. Cousins would smile indulgently when I mentioned my work. Aunts and uncles would nod politely and then change the subject. My own experiences became family folklore, stories that were fun to hear but not quite believed. I stopped talking about my deployments. I stopped sharing the challenges and victories of military life. I learned to deflect questions with vague answers and generic responses. It was easier than watching Emma's eyes roll or hearing her barely concealed chuckles when I tried to share the reality of my service. The silence grew between us over the years. Not the hostile silence of an active feud, but the hollow silence of two people who no longer knew how to communicate authentically. Emma's career flourished. Mine did too, but in a world she couldn't see or understand or believe in. By the time I earned my sergeant major stripes and began working directly with Pentagon officials on classified operations, Emma had convinced not only herself, but most of our extended family that my military career was essentially an elaborate form of community theater. I was playing soldier, not being one. My stories were creative writing, not lived experience. And that's how we ended up at Christmas dinner, 3 years after my second deployment, with Emma performing her skepticism for a captive audience, publicly mocking stories she had never bothered to verify, dismissing experiences she had never tried to understand. What Emma didn't know, which she couldn't have known, was that some of those fake war stories were about to become required reading at the War College. What she couldn't have imagined was that the imaginary military friends I supposedly invented included Pentagon generals who knew my name and my record. What she never considered was that her little sister, the one she remembered as quiet and unremarkable, had become someone whose expertise was sought at the highest levels of military command. The phone call from General Morrison wasn't just about my latest commendation, it was about recognition for work I had done that remained classified, operations that had prevented attacks on American soil, techniques I had developed that were saving lives in active theaters around the world. Emma thought she was exposing my fake war stories. What she actually did was force a two-star general to publicly validate experiences that were more extraordinary than she had ever imagined. The silence that followed General Morrison's call was unlike anything I had ever experienced in our family. Emma sat frozen in her chair, her face cycling through expressions of shock, embarrassment, and something that might have been horror as she realized what she had just done. Our cousin Jake was the first to find his voice. "Sarah, I had no idea. I mean, we all knew you were in the army, but you didn't believe the stories were real," I finished for him. Grandmother reached across the table and took my hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "Sweetheart, forgive an old woman's ignorance. I never understood what you were doing over there, and I certainly never understood how dangerous it was." I squeezed her hand. "It's okay, Grandma. It's not the kind of thing you talk about at dinner parties." Emma finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Sarah, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." "But I do." She looked around the table at the faces staring back at us, then focused on me with an intensity I hadn't seen from her in years. "I've been wrong. Not just tonight, but for years. I've been so wrong." The room was still silent, everyone waiting to see what would happen next between the sisters who had just experienced a seismic shift in their relationship. "Why didn't you ever show me proof?" Emma asked, her voice stronger now, but still shaking. "Why didn't you ever insist that I take you seriously?" It was a fair question, and one I had asked myself many times over the years. "Because I shouldn't have had to," I said simply.
You're my sister. My word should have been enough. Emma's eyes filled with tears for the first time in the conversation. But I made it not enough. I made you feel like you had to prove yourself to your own family. Yes, you did. She flinched at the directness of my response, but I wasn't going to soften the truth. Not anymore. The stories I told you, I continued, those weren't just adventures or experiences. They were moments when people's lives hung in the balance, when split-second decisions meant the difference between soldiers coming home or not coming home, when technical knowledge and steady hands were all that stood between a bomb and innocent civilians. I could see Emma processing this information, trying to reconcile the dramatic stories she had dismissed with the reality that they were, if anything, understated rather than exaggerated. The bomb disposal work you thought was so unrealistic? I've diffused more explosive devices than most EOD specialists see in entire careers. The tactical leadership you found so hard to believe? I've commanded joint operations with special forces units in situations that are still classified. Emma's face was pale now, the full weight of her years of dismissal settling on her shoulders. The convoy operations, the village evacuations, the international incidents I mentioned, all real, all documented, all part of a service record that earned me recognition from the highest levels of military command. I paused, letting the reality sink in for everyone at the table. But more than that, they were moments when I had to be someone you never thought I could be. Someone decisive, someone brave, someone other people counted on to make impossible choices under pressure. The quiet little sister you remembered? She's still here, but she's also someone who can function in situations that would terrify most people. My uncle, who had been silent throughout the entire confrontation, cleared his throat. Sarah, I think I speak for everyone when I say we owe you an apology. We should have known better. We should have believed you. You should have, I agreed. But I also understand why you didn't. Emma's version of reality was more comfortable for everyone. It was easier to believe that I was exaggerating than to accept that someone in your family was regularly putting herself in mortal danger. Emma wiped her eyes with the napkin, her composure finally completely shattered. How do you forgive something like this? How do you forgive years of being dismissed and mocked by your own sister? I thought about that question for a long moment. Forgiveness wasn't something that could be demanded or rushed. It had to be earned and it had to be given freely. I don't know if I'm ready to forgive yet, I said honestly, but I'm willing to start fresh if you are. Emma nodded quickly. Yes, God, yes. I want to understand. I want to know who you really are, what you've really done. I want to be the sister you deserved instead of the one you got stuck with. It was a start, not a resolution, not an immediate fix, but an acknowledgement of the damage that had been done and a commitment to try to repair it. The rest of the evening was different from any family gathering we had ever had. Instead of Emma holding court with stories about corporate victories, she asked questions, real questions, about my training, about my deployments, about the technical aspects of bomb disposal that she had once found so unbelievable. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't in years, sharing not just the dramatic moments, but the daily reality of military service, the friendships forged under pressure, the responsibility of leadership, the weight of decisions that affected other people's lives. Emma listened without skepticism, without interruption, with a focus and respect she had never shown my experiences before. It was a beginning. As the evening wound down and family members began to leave, Emma approached me one more time. The ceremony, the general mentioned, the Distinguished Service Cross, is that a big deal? I almost smiled at the question. It's the second highest decoration for valor in combat. It's a very big deal. Would it be okay if I came to the ceremony?
I studied her face, looking for any trace of the old Emma, the one who would attend for appearances or to be seen at an important event. What I saw instead was genuine humility and a desire to understand. I'd like that, I said. I know I don't have any right to ask this, but could you tell me about the action that earned it? The real story, not the version I would have dismissed as fake. So I did. I told her about the operation in Syria, about the compound filled with hostages, about the IED network that had to be dismantled while under fire from multiple positions. I told her about the choices I made, the risks I took, and the lives that were saved because of technical knowledge she had never bothered to take seriously. Emma listened in silence, her face pale but attentive. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. I'm proud of you, she said finally. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud to be your sister. The words meant more than I wanted to admit, not because I needed Emma's approval to validate my service, but because I had missed having a sister who could see me clearly. 2 weeks later, Emma kept her promise. She sat in the front row at the Pentagon ceremony, wearing a conservative dress instead of her usual designer power suit. Her attention focused entirely on the proceedings, rather than on making business connections with other attendees. When General Morrison pinned the Distinguished Service Cross to my uniform and read the citation aloud, I saw tears in Emma's eyes. Not tears of embarrassment or social discomfort, but tears of pride and recognition. After the ceremony, she introduced herself to my fellow service members not as the successful corporate executive she was, but as Sarah's sister. She listened to their stories about serving under my command, about missions where my expertise had made the difference, about the respect I had earned in a world she was only beginning to understand. That evening, over dinner at a quiet restaurant in D.C., Emma asked me a question that surprised me. Do you think I could still change? I know I'm 35 and set in my ways, but do you think I could become the kind of person who sees clearly instead of through her own assumptions? I think, I said carefully, that recognizing the need to change is the first step to actually changing. I've spent so many years being certain about everything, especially about you. It's terrifying to realize how wrong I was about someone I thought I knew completely. You did know me. You knew the girl I was. You just couldn't see the woman I became. Emma nodded slowly. I want to see her now. The real you, not the version I created in my head. Over the months that followed, Emma made an effort that I hadn't expected. She read military history, trying to understand the context of my service. She researched the conflicts I had been involved in, the techniques I had mastered, the innovations I had contributed to the field of explosive ordnance disposal. She didn't pretend to become an expert overnight, but she asked informed questions. She listened with respect instead of skepticism. She began to introduce me to her friends, not as her military sister, but as my sister, who serves our country in ways I'm only beginning to understand. The change wasn't immediate or complete. Years of assumptions don't disappear overnight, and rebuilding trust takes time. But Emma proved she was serious about being different by making space for my reality, instead of trying to reshape it to fit her comfort zone. The most meaningful moment came 6 months after the ceremony. Emma called me from her office in Manhattan, her voice excited in a way I hadn't heard since we were children. Sarah, I was just in a meeting with some potential clients, and one of them mentioned he was a veteran. When he started talking about EOD work, I found myself thinking about everything you've taught me. I actually understood what he was describing, and I was able to ask intelligent questions. That's great, Emma. But that's not the important part. The important part is that afterward, he thanked me for taking his service seriously. He said most civilian executives just nod politely when he talks about military experience, but I actually engaged with what he was saying. I could hear the emotion in her voice as she continued, and I realized that's what I did to you for so many years. I nodded politely and then dismissed everything you tried to share with me. I made you feel invisible in your own family. Emma! No, let me finish. I want you to know that I understand now what I took from you. Not just respect, but the chance to be seen and known by your own sister. I robbed us both of years of real relationship because I was too arrogant to believe that you could be extraordinary. The conversation continued for an hour, with Emma sharing insights about her own limitations and blind spots, about the assumptions she had made not just about me, but about service members in general. She used to think that corporate success was the highest form of achievement. She measured everyone, including you, against that standard. She never considered that there might be forms of excellence that had nothing to do with profit margins or market share. And now? Now I think that what you do, what you've always done, is the most important work in the world. You put yourself between danger and innocent people. You use knowledge and skill to save lives.
You lead others in situations where leadership means the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. I also think that the girl who used to hide in corners and avoid attention became the woman who steps toward danger when everyone else is running away from it. And I'm ashamed that I never saw that transformation happening.
That phone call marked a turning point in our relationship. Not back to where we had been before, because that relationship had been built on unequal ground, but forward to something new, something based on mutual respect and genuine understanding. Emma began joining me for Veterans Day ceremonies, not as a supporter making an appearance, but as someone who understood the significance of the day. She volunteered with organizations that help transitioning service members, using her business skills to help veterans navigate civilian career challenges. Most importantly, she became an advocate for military families in her corporate world. When colleagues made dismissive comments about military service or assumed that business success was inherently more valuable than military achievement, Emma corrected them. Not aggressively, but with the kind of firm conviction that comes from personal understanding. The sister who had once mocked my fake war stories became someone who could speak knowledgeably about military service because she had taken the time to learn. She never pretended to be an expert, but she showed the kind of respect that comes from recognizing expertise in others. Years later, when I was promoted to Command Sergeant Major and took on responsibilities that involved briefing Pentagon leadership on strategic initiatives, Emma attended the promotion ceremony with our parents. Afterward, she introduced herself to my fellow senior non-commissioned officers, not as someone important in her own right, but as someone honored to be related to me. "I spent too many years not understanding what my sister was accomplishing," she told them. "I'm grateful for the chance to learn better." One of the sergeants major she met that day later told me it was refreshing to encounter a civilian family member who understood that military service was a profession requiring expertise, dedication, and sacrifice, rather than just a job someone took because they couldn't succeed in the civilian world. That comment would have devastated the old Emma, who believed corporate success was the ultimate measure of achievement. The new Emma took it as validation that she was finally seeing clearly. Our relationship today isn't perfect. We still approach the world from different perspectives, value different things, and sometimes struggle to understand each other's choices. But it's built on a foundation of mutual respect rather than assumptions and dismissal. Emma has become someone I can trust with the truth about my work, my challenges, and my achievements. She no longer needs to diminish my experiences to make sense of them or fit them into her worldview. She can celebrate my successes without feeling threatened by them. More importantly, she has become someone who fights for accurate understanding rather than comfortable misconceptions. When other family members or friends make assumptions about military service, Emma corrects them with the same intensity she once brought to dismissing my stories. The Christmas dinner confrontation that changed everything between us taught us both valuable lessons. Emma learned that her assumptions about people, especially people close to her, could be devastatingly wrong. She learned that dismissing someone else's reality doesn't make it less real, it just makes you less informed. I learned that sometimes the people who should know us best are the ones who struggle most to see us clearly, not because they don't care, but because their image of who we are becomes frozen at some point in the past. Growth requires us to update our understanding of the people we love, and that updating requires humility. But perhaps the most important lesson for both of us was that relationships can be rebuilt on stronger foundations when both people are willing to abandon their old assumptions and start fresh with respect and curiosity. The training began at dawn, and every muscle in my body screamed in protest. Fort Benning in Georgia was a furnace in July, humidity so thick you could almost chew it. The drill sergeants moved like predators through our formation, finding weakness with surgical precision and exploiting it without mercy. I had thought I was prepared. Cross-country in high school had given me endurance, but nothing had prepared me for the relentless physical and mental pressure of Army basic training. The first week nearly broke me. While other recruits collapsed dramatically or quit outright, I learned to endure quietly, to find strength in places I never knew existed within myself. "Private Chen," Drill Sergeant Martinez's voice cut through the morning air like a whip crack.
You think this is a social club? Drop and give me 20. I hit the ground without hesitation, my palms finding purchase on the rough concrete. Push-ups had become as natural as breathing after the first month. What surprised me wasn't the physical demand, but how much I thrived under the structure, the clarity of expectations, the absolute meritocracy of military life. In Emma's world, success had always been measured by connections, by who you knew and how well you could navigate social hierarchies. Here, your performance spoke for itself. You either could keep up or you couldn't. You either could be trusted under pressure or you couldn't. No amount of charm or family connections could substitute for competence. The other women in my training company came from backgrounds as varied as their reasons for enlisting. Jessica from Detroit joined to escape poverty. Maria from Texas wanted to serve her country like her father had. Rachel from Oregon was paying for medical school. We bonded over shared misery and mutual support in ways that transcended the superficial friendships I had known in civilian life. "Chen, you're different than I expected," Jessica said one evening as we cleaned our weapons in the barracks. Her tone was thoughtful rather than accusatory. "Different how?" "You've got that quiet, bookish thing going on, but you don't quit, do you?" I considered the question while I ran the cleaning rod through my rifle barrel. I don't see the point in quitting. Most people quit when things get hard enough. Most people haven't spent their lives being underestimated. Jessica nodded slowly. "Yeah, I can see that. You've got something to prove." She was right, though I didn't fully understand it at the time. I had spent 18 years being Emma's less impressive sister, the one who wasn't destined for greatness, the one who needed to find a more practical path. Basic training was the first environment where Emma's achievements meant nothing, and my potential was limited only by my own determination. The physical challenges became easier as my body adapted, but the mental aspects of military training revealed abilities I had never suspected in myself. Map reading, tactical planning, weapons proficiency, leadership exercises under stress. These skills came naturally in ways that surprised my instructors and shocked my fellow trainees. During our first field exercise, our squad was tasked with navigating a complex course while carrying full packs and simulated wounded soldiers. Most groups approached the problem with brute force, trying to power through obstacles with pure physical effort. I studied the terrain, identified the most efficient routes, and organized our team's movement to minimize energy expenditure while maximizing speed. Private Chen, Drill Sergeant Martinez, called me aside after we finished the course with the best time in our company. "Where did you learn tactical thinking like that?" "I read a lot, Drill Sergeant." "Read what?" "Military history, strategy manuals. I was interested in how battles were won and lost." He studied me with new interest. "Ever consider officer candidate school?" The question caught me off guard. Officers were leaders, decision makers, the people responsible for life and death choices. I had always thought of myself as a follower, someone who worked better behind the scenes. "I don't know if I'm officer material, Drill Sergeant." Officer material isn't about being the loudest or the most confident. It's about making good decisions under pressure and taking care of the people under your command. You've got both those qualities. That conversation planted a seed that would shape the rest of my military career. The idea that leadership wasn't about charisma or social dominance, but about competence and care for others opened possibilities I had never considered. Graduation from basic training was a milestone that felt more significant than high school or anything I had achieved in civilian life. Standing in formation, wearing the uniform I had earned, I felt a sense of belonging that had eluded me for most of my life. This was something I had done entirely on my own merit, without riding on anyone else's accomplishments. My family attended the ceremony. My parents looked proud but slightly bewildered, as if they couldn't quite reconcile the daughter they knew with the soldier standing at attention. Emma seemed genuinely impressed, though I could see her struggling to process the transformation. "You look so different," she said afterwards, studying my uniform and posture. "I feel different. Military discipline really suits you. I can see why you chose this." It was the most positive thing Emma had said about my military service, and I treasured the validation even as part of me resented needing it. Advanced individual training took me to Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, where I specialized in military police work. The choice surprised some people who knew me as quiet and conflict avoidant, but MP training appealed to the part of me that valued order and justice. The technical aspects of law enforcement came naturally: investigations, evidence collection, report writing. But the interpersonal skills required for military policing pushed me out of my comfort zone in productive ways. Learning to de-escalate conflicts, to command respect through presence rather than aggression, to make split-second judgments about people's intentions. These abilities would serve me throughout my career. My first duty assignment was Fort Carson in Colorado. The base was massive, a small city with its own unique culture and challenges. As a junior MP, I started with routine patrols and minor incident reports, but my supervisors quickly recognized my attention to detail and analytical abilities. "Chen, you see patterns other people miss," Sergeant Williams told me after I identified a series of seemingly unrelated thefts that turned out to be connected. "Have you ever considered investigative work?" "I like solving puzzles." "Crime is just puzzles with consequences. You might have a gift for this." My transition into criminal investigations opened a new chapter in my military experience. White-collar crime, theft rings, assault cases, domestic violence situations. Each investigation required a different approach, different skills, different ways of reading people and situations. The work was often emotionally challenging. Military communities, like any communities, had their share of violence and dysfunction. But there was satisfaction in bringing clarity to confused situations, in protecting victims, in holding perpetrators accountable regardless of their rank or connections. "Private Chen," Captain Rodriguez called me into his office 6 months into my assignment. "I'm recommending you for accelerated promotion. Your case closure rate is exceptional, and your attention to detail has prevented several command issues from escalating." The promotion to private first class came with increased responsibilities and higher expectations. I was assigned to more complex cases, given supervisory duties over newer soldiers, and included in briefings with senior leadership about base security issues. That's when I first encountered the reality that would define much of my later career: the intersection of military service and national security. Some of the investigations I worked on involved security clearances, potential espionage, threats to critical infrastructure. The stakes were higher than simple criminal cases, and the pressure to get details right was immense. "You have a security mindset," Captain Rodriguez observed during one of our regular counseling sessions. "You think about second and third order effects, about how individual actions might impact larger operations. That's rare in junior enlisted personnel." "I just try to think through all the possibilities." "It's more than that. You have strategic thinking abilities that are unusual at your level. Have you given more thought to officer candidate school?" The question kept coming up from different supervisors, and I was starting to take it seriously. But first, I wanted to prove myself in my current role, to establish a track record that would make me worthy of increased responsibility. My first deployment came 18 months after arriving at Fort Carson. Kuwait, not a combat zone, but close enough to ongoing operations that security was paramount.
Our mission was to provide law enforcement and security services for a major logistics hub that supplied forces throughout the region. The work was different from garrison duty: higher tempo, more stress, greater consequences for mistakes, but also more opportunity for impact, for making decisions that affected mission success rather than just administrative efficiency. "Chen, I need you to take lead on the supply security investigation," Lieutenant Colonel Hayes told me during my 3rd month in country. "We've got indication that materials are being diverted, but we can't figure out how or by whom." Supply theft in a combat theater wasn't just criminal activity. It was a threat to operational readiness. Soldiers in forward positions depended on those supplies for everything from ammunition to medical equipment. Disrupting the theft network was literally a matter of life and death. The investigation took me deep into the logistics chain, from port operations in Kuwait to forward operating bases throughout the region. I learned how materials moved through the military supply system, where vulnerabilities existed, how documentation could be manipulated to hide illegal activity. What I discovered was more sophisticated than simple theft. An organized network was diverting supplies to black market dealers, who then sold them to insurgent groups that used them against American forces.
The investigation required coordination with intelligence agencies, cooperation from host nation authorities, and careful documentation that would support prosecutions in military court. Outstanding work, Sergeant Chen, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes said when we finally dismantled the network. The promotion to sergeant had come through during the investigation, recognition of both my investigative skills and my leadership of the team that cracked the case. Thank you, sir. I learned a lot. I hope you learned that you're capable of handling complex, high-stakes operations, because I'm recommending you for specialized training when we get back stateside. The specialized training turned out to be Explosive Ordnance Disposal School. EOD work required technical precision, steady nerves, and the ability to make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure. It was also one of the most dangerous specialties in the military, with casualty rates that made even seasoned soldiers nervous. Why EOD? I asked Lieutenant Colonel Hayes when he explained the assignment. Because you have the right combination of technical aptitude and emotional stability. EOD technicians can't afford to panic, can't afford to make mistakes, can't afford to let pressure interfere with their judgment. You've proven you can handle all of that. EOD school at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida was unlike anything I had experienced in the military. The technical knowledge required was enormous: electronics, chemistry, physics, metallurgy. Understanding how explosive devices worked, how they could be defeated, how to approach each situation with the right tools and techniques. But beyond the technical aspects, EOD training was fundamentally about decision-making under pressure. Every device was different. Every situation required analysis, planning, execution with no room for error. A single mistake could kill not just the technician, but everyone in the blast radius. Chen, you're one of the most naturally gifted EOD students I've seen, Master Sergeant Foster told me during the advanced phase of training. You have intuitive understanding of how devices work and how to defeat them safely. It's just problem solving. No, it's more than that. Some people can follow procedures perfectly but can't adapt when they encounter something unexpected. You can improvise solutions while maintaining safety protocols. That's a rare combination. The first time I approached a live device, my heart rate spiked and my hands trembled slightly. But as I began the methodical process of analysis and disarmament, training took over. The device became a puzzle to solve rather than a threat to fear. Each wire, each component, each potential trigger had logic behind it. My job was to understand that logic and defeat it. Time, Master Sergeant Foster called out as I completed the procedure. I stepped back from the training device, adrenaline still coursing through my system, but hands steady. The device was safe, rendered harmless through careful analysis and precise action. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I found what I was meant to do." And I had. EOD work combined technical expertise, analytical thinking, and high-stakes decision-making in ways that used every skill I had developed. It was also work that commanded automatic respect throughout the military. EOD technicians were the people others called when situations were too dangerous for anyone else to handle. My first assignment as a qualified EOD technician took me back to the Middle East, this time to Afghanistan. The mission was different from my previous deployment. Instead of investigating crimes, I was neutralizing explosive threats that could kill American soldiers and Afghan civilians. The work was intense from the first day. Improvised explosive devices were the weapon of choice for insurgent forces, hidden along patrol routes, buried in roads, concealed in buildings. Each device required careful analysis to determine the safest approach for disarmament. "Sergeant Chen," Captain Morrison said during my initial briefing, "you're being assigned to one of our busiest sectors. The threat level is high, but your team will be working with some of the best operators in theater. Learn from them." My team consisted of 3 other EOD technicians and support personnel who provided security and technical assistance. The team leader was Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran of multiple deployments with extensive experience in combat operations. "Chen, I know you're new to combat EOD, but your training scores were exceptional. Trust your training, trust your team, and don't let the pressure make you second-guess yourself." The first device I encountered in combat was hidden in a roadside culvert, triggered by a pressure plate that would detonate when vehicles passed over it. The device was sophisticated, with multiple fail-safe mechanisms designed to prevent disarmament.
As I approached in my protective suit, every lesson from EOD school ran through my mind. Analyze the device, identify the trigger mechanism, determine the safest approach for neutralization, work methodically, precisely, without rushing despite the pressure. The device took 47 minutes to render safe. When I finally stood up and gave the all-clear signal, I realized I had been holding my breath for the last 10 minutes. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the knowledge that this was just the first of many similar situations I would face. "Good work, Chen," Rodrigo said afterward. "You stayed calm, followed procedures, didn't let the combat environment rattle you. That's exactly what we need." Over the following months, I encountered devices of increasing complexity and sophistication. Each successful disarmament added to my experience and reputation. Other units began requesting our team specifically because of our success rate and technical capabilities. The work was dangerous, but it was also meaningful in immediate, tangible ways. Every device we rendered safe was a convoy that could pass without being attacked, a patrol that could move through an area without fear, civilians who could go about their daily lives without the threat of sudden violence. "Sergeant Shen," Major Williams called me into his office after 3 months of deployment, "your performance has been exceptional. I'm recommending you for both a Bronze Star and accelerated promotion to Staff Sergeant." The Bronze Star was awarded for meritorious service in combat operations, recognizing not just technical competence, but leadership and courage under fire. It was validation that my work was making a meaningful difference in mission success and force protection. But more than individual recognition, I was beginning to understand how my technical expertise fit into larger strategic objectives. EOD work wasn't just about individual devices. It was about understanding enemy tactics, developing countermeasures, and sharing knowledge that could save lives across the entire theater of operations. "Chen, I want you to start working with our intelligence analysts. Your field experience with enemy devices could help them understand evolving tactics and predict future threats." The intelligence work opened another dimension of military service. Instead of just responding to immediate threats, I was helping to anticipate and prevent future attacks. The analytical skills that had served me in criminal investigations proved valuable in understanding patterns of enemy behavior and technological development. "Staff Sergeant Chen," Colonel Patterson said during a briefing at brigade headquarters, "your insights into IED construction and placement have helped us modify our patrol routes and force protection measures. That's the kind of strategic thinking we need more of." Strategic thinking. The phrase echoed what Captain Rodriguez had said about my security mindset years earlier. I was beginning to understand that my value to the military went beyond technical skills, to include the ability to see connections and implications that others might miss. My second deployment to Afghanistan came with increased responsibilities. In addition to field EOD work, I was tasked with training Afghan National Army personnel in basic explosive recognition and response procedures. Teaching technical skills to personnel with limited education and language barriers required patience and creativity. Sergeant Major, Lieutenant Hassan of the Afghan National Army, approached me after one of our training sessions. "Your methods are different from other American instructors. You teach us to think, not just to follow procedures." Thinking is what keeps you alive when you encounter something unexpected. Yes, but many instructors want us only to do exactly what they show us. You want us to understand why. That conversation helped me realize that my teaching approach reflected something fundamental about how I had learned to excel in military service. Understanding the why behind procedures made it possible to adapt when situations didn't match training scenarios exactly. The most significant incident of my second deployment came during a joint operation with Special Forces units. Intelligence had identified a compound where insurgents were manufacturing sophisticated IEDs for attacks throughout the region. My job was to assess the explosive materials and render them safe for removal or destruction. Sergeant Major Chen, Captain Reynolds of the Special Forces Unit, briefed me before the operation. "This is a high-value target. The devices they're producing have been responsible for numerous coalition casualties. We need to secure the materials and any intelligence about their distribution network." The compound contained the most sophisticated IED laboratory I had encountered. Professional equipment, high-quality explosives, detailed technical manuals in multiple languages. This wasn't amateur hour. This was an organized production facility with connections to international networks.
This is more advanced than anything we've seen in this region, I told Captain Reynolds as we surveyed the facility. The level of technical sophistication suggests training and support from outside sources. The process of securing the facility required 12 hours of careful work. Each device had to be analyzed, documented, and either rendered safe for transport or destroyed in place. The intelligence value was enormous, but so was the danger of making a mistake that could destroy evidence or cause casualties. "Outstanding work, Sergeant Major," Colonel Patterson said when we returned to base. "The intelligence collected from that operation has already led to disruption of IED networks in 3 other provinces." But the real validation came in a different form. General Morrison, who commanded all EOD operations in theater, requested to meet with me personally to discuss the technical findings from the operation. "Sergeant Major Chen," General Morrison said during our meeting, "your analysis of the devices recovered has provided insights that are changing how we approach counter-IED operations throughout the region."
That's the kind of impact we need from our senior non-commissioned officers. Senior non-commissioned officer. The phrase carried weight that I was still learning to accept. I was no longer just a technical specialist following orders. I was a leader whose decisions affected strategic outcomes and whose expertise influenced policy at the highest levels. My 3rd deployment took me to Syria, where the explosive threat environment was even more complex than Afghanistan. Multiple factions, different technical capabilities, urban environments that presented unique challenges for EOD operations. Sergeant Major Chen, Brigadier General Hayes briefed me before deployment. "You're being assigned to a joint task force working with international partners. Your technical expertise and cultural sensitivity make you ideal for this mission." Working with international forces required adaptation to different procedures, different equipment, different approaches to risk management. But the core mission remained the same: neutralize explosive threats to protect coalition forces and civilian populations. The Syrian deployment was where I first encountered chemical weapons components mixed with conventional explosives. The devices were designed not just to kill through blast effects, but to contaminate areas with toxic materials that would make them uninhabitable. "This changes everything," I told Colonel Martinez during our briefing on the first chemical-enhanced device we encountered. "We're not just dealing with explosive threats anymore. We're dealing with weapons of mass destruction." The technical challenges of dealing with chemical explosive combinations required new procedures, new equipment, new levels of caution, but it also required strategic thinking about implications beyond the immediate tactical situation. "Sergeant Major Chen," General Morrison called me directly after receiving my technical report, "your analysis of the chemical components has confirmed intelligence assessments about enemy capabilities. This information is going directly to Pentagon planners." Pentagon planners. My fieldwork was now informing decisions at the highest levels of military command. The quiet girl who had once struggled to assert herself in family conversations was now providing technical expertise that influenced national security policy. The Syrian deployment also brought my first experience with joint operations involving civilian agencies. FBI, CIA, State Department personnel, all working together on operations that crossed traditional boundaries between military and civilian authority. "Sergeant Major Chen," Assistant Director Walsh from the FBI said during one of our joint planning sessions, "your technical expertise is exactly what we need for this operation. The devices we're expecting to encounter are beyond the capabilities of our civilian EOD teams." The operation involved securing a facility where chemical weapons components were being prepared for shipment to multiple destinations. The intelligence value was enormous, but so were the technical challenges and political sensitivities. "This facility contains evidence of international trafficking networks," I told the joint planning team after my initial assessment. "The materials here didn't originate locally. They were imported through sophisticated smuggling operations."
The successful completion of that operation earned me recognition not just from military leadership, but from civilian agencies that rarely acknowledge military contributions to their missions. Sergeant Major Chen, Director Thompson from the CIA, said afterward, "Your technical analysis provided the foundation for disrupting networks that extend far beyond this theater of operations. That's intelligence work of the highest caliber." Intelligence work. Another dimension of military service that I had never anticipated when I first enlisted to prove myself worthy of the uniform. I had thought military service would be about following orders and demonstrating competence within established parameters. Instead, I had discovered that the military valued initiative, innovation, and the ability to see connections between tactical actions and strategic objectives. All the qualities that had made me feel out of place in Emma's world of corporate hierarchies had found their proper application in military service. The transition to Pentagon duty was jarring after years of deployment cycles and field operations. Instead of analyzing explosive devices under combat conditions, I was analyzing intelligence reports and briefing senior officials about technical capabilities and threat assessments. Sergeant Major Chen, Major General Roberts said during my first week at the Pentagon, "Your field experience gives you credibility that most staff officers lack. When you tell us something is possible or impossible, we believe you because you've actually done the work." Credibility based on experience rather than connections or academic credentials, it was a form of respect I had never encountered in civilian environments, where authority often seemed to flow from social position rather than demonstrated competence. My Pentagon work focused on developing new approaches to explosive threat mitigation, coordinating with international partners on technical standards, and providing expertise for operations planning across multiple theaters of operation. Sergeant Major Chen, Secretary of Defense Williams said during one of the briefings I provided to senior leadership, "Your recommendations for improving EOD training and equipment have been implemented throughout the force. That's the kind of impact we need from our subject matter experts." Subject matter expert. The designation carried responsibility for being the military's definitive source of knowledge on explosive ordnance disposal techniques and technologies. It was authority based entirely on expertise and experience rather than rank or position. The work was intellectually challenging in ways that complemented the physical and emotional challenges of field operations. Policy development, resource allocation, international cooperation, technological innovation, all aspects of military service that I had never considered when I first enlisted.
Chen, General Morrison said during one of our regular meetings, "You're being considered for promotion to Sergeant Major, an assignment to lead EOD operations for an entire theater. That would make you one of the most senior enlisted personnel in your specialty." Theater-level responsibility meant oversight of EOD operations across multiple countries, coordination with international partners, and direct reporting to general officers about capabilities and threat assessments. It was a level of responsibility that seemed impossible for the girl who had once hidden in Emma's shadow. But by then, I understood that military leadership wasn't about commanding attention or dominating conversations. It was about making good decisions under pressure, taking care of the people under your command, and providing accurate information to support larger strategic objectives. The promotion to Sergeant Major came with assignment as the Senior EOD Advisor for Central Command, responsible for operations throughout the Middle East and Central Asia. It was a position that required both technical expertise and diplomatic skills, as I worked with host nation forces and international partners on shared security challenges. "Sergeant Major Chen," General Peterson said during my assumption of responsibility ceremony, "you represent the best of what military service can produce. Technical expertise earned through dangerous fieldwork, leadership developed through challenging assignments, and strategic perspective gained through diverse operational experience." The ceremony was attended by military personnel from multiple countries, recognition of the international nature of modern military operations, and the importance of technical cooperation in addressing shared threats. But what meant the most to me was the message I received afterward from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, my first team leader in Afghanistan.
Sergeant Major, I always knew you had it in you to reach the top levels of our profession. What I didn't expect was how you would use that position to make everyone around you better at what they do. That's real leadership. Real leadership. Not the kind based on charisma or social dominance, but the kind that emerged from competence, caring, and commitment to something larger than personal advancement. It was leadership I had never thought myself capable of when I first enlisted, but which had developed naturally through years of challenging assignments and increasing responsibility. My work at Central Command involved not just technical oversight, but strategic planning for future operations, assessment of emerging threats, and development of new capabilities to meet evolving challenges. It was work that influenced military policy at the highest levels and shaped how resources were allocated throughout the region. Sergeant Major Chen, Admiral Thompson said during one of the joint planning sessions I attended, "Your insights into technical vulnerabilities and countermeasures have been essential to our operational planning. That's exactly the kind of expertise we need from our senior enlisted advisors." Senior enlisted advisor. The role carried responsibility for representing the perspective of the enlisted force to senior officers, ensuring that policy decisions took into account the realities of implementation at the operational level. It was during this assignment that I first began receiving recognition outside the military community. Technical papers I had written were published in academic journals, and I was invited to speak at international conferences on security cooperation and threat mitigation. Sergeant Major Chen, Dr. Harrison from the National Defense University said after one of my presentations, "Your combination of field experience and analytical thinking provides insights that pure academics cannot match. Have you considered writing a comprehensive assessment of EOD evolution in modern warfare?" The book project became a way to synthesize everything I had learned about technical innovation, tactical adaptation, and strategic application of EOD capabilities. But it also became a reflection on how military service had challenged and developed abilities I never knew I possessed. Writing required a different kind of precision than field operations, but the same attention to detail and commitment to accuracy. Each chapter had to be technically sound while remaining accessible to readers without specialized knowledge. Sergeant Major, General Morrison said when the book was published, "This is exactly the kind of professional development we need from our senior enlisted personnel. You're contributing to the broader understanding of your specialty while advancing your own professional growth." Professional growth. The phrase captured something essential about military service that I had never understood when I first enlisted. The military wasn't just about following orders and demonstrating competence within established parameters. It was about continuous learning, adaptation, and contribution to the larger mission. My final assignment in the enlisted ranks was as the senior EOD advisor to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest level of military command in the United States. It was a position that required briefing the most senior military officials in the country about technical capabilities and threat assessments. Sergeant Major Chen, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Williams, said during my initial briefing, "Your expertise will be essential as we develop strategies for addressing emerging threats and allocating resources for future operations. We need your technical perspective to inform our strategic decisions." Strategic decisions that affected military operations worldwide, resource allocation that determined what capabilities would be available to forces in the field, policy development that shaped how the military approached complex technical challenges. It was responsibility that seemed surreal for someone who had started military service as a way to prove herself worthy of respect. But by then, I understood that respect in the military was earned through competence and contribution, not granted based on social position or family connections. Sergeant Major, Secretary of Defense Martinez, said during one of the briefings I provided, "Your recommendations have directly influenced our approach to emerging threats and international cooperation. That's the kind of impact we need from our most experienced personnel." The work was demanding but deeply satisfying. Technical expertise applied to strategic challenges, field experience informing policy decisions, years of dangerous operations contributing to the safety and effectiveness of current military personnel. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of the assignment was the opportunity to mentor junior personnel who were beginning their own military careers. Sharing knowledge and experience, helping others develop the capabilities that would serve them throughout their service. Sergeant Major Chen, Captain Johnson said after one of our mentoring sessions, "Your guidance has helped me understand how technical expertise fits into larger strategic objectives. That perspective is exactly what I needed to advance in my own career." Mentoring reminded me of how much I had learned from senior personnel throughout my own career, how their guidance had shaped my development and opened opportunities I might never have discovered on my own. It was also during this assignment that I received the call that would change my relationship with Emma forever. The call about my impending recognition with the Distinguished Service Cross, the ceremony that would bring my military service full circle from the girl who had left home with a duffel bag to the senior enlisted advisor who briefed the nation's highest military leaders. The ceremony was the culmination of everything I had worked toward throughout my military career, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter in my relationship with my family. Recognition not just from military leadership, but from the sister who had spent years doubting the reality of my service and achievements. Standing on that stage, receiving recognition for actions that had saved lives and influenced strategic outcomes, I thought about the journey that had brought me to that moment. From basic training through multiple deployments, from technical specialist to strategic advisor, from following orders to informing policy at the highest levels. But most importantly, I thought about the transformation from someone who sought validation from others to someone who found satisfaction in service to something larger than personal advancement. Military service had taught me that the most meaningful achievements were often the ones that contributed to shared success rather than individual advancement. The girl who enlisted to prove herself worthy of respect had become a woman who earned respect through competence and contribution. And that transformation had happened not because of family approval or social recognition, but because the military had provided an environment where excellence was rewarded, regardless of background or connections. Emma's recognition of my service meant something, but it was no longer essential to my sense of worth or identity. I had found validation in the most demanding environment possible, earned through the most rigorous standards imaginable. That validation would last regardless of what anyone else thought about my choices or achievements. The weeks following that Christmas dinner transformed our family dynamics completely. Emma called me 3 days after the general's verification, her voice shaking with genuine remorse. She asked if we could meet privately, away from family expectations and social pressures.
I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, neutral territory where neither of us held advantage. Emma looked different somehow. Smaller, less commanding than the corporate executive who had dominated family gatherings for years. Her designer confidence seemed stripped away, leaving someone vulnerable and uncertain. She apologized not just for that night, but for years of dismissal, for treating my service as fiction, for making family gatherings uncomfortable with her mockery. The apology was thorough, specific, acknowledging damage she had caused without making excuses or shifting blame. I listened without interrupting, watching my sister confront the reality of her own assumptions. This wasn't the Emma I had grown up with, the one who was always certain, always right, always in control. This was someone learning humility through painful recognition of her own failures. When she finished, I told her something I had never said before, that her dismissal had hurt more than enemy fire, more than any physical wound I had sustained in combat. Family rejection cuts deeper than stranger skepticism because it comes from people who should know you best. Emma cried then, openly and without her usual concern for appearance. She asked how I could possibly forgive such sustained betrayal, such willful blindness to my achievements and sacrifices. I told her forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing, but about choosing not to let past wounds define our future relationship. The conversation lasted 4 hours. We talked about our childhood, about the different paths we had chosen, about the assumptions we had both made about success and worth. Emma admitted she had measured everyone, including herself, against narrow definitions of achievement that excluded service and sacrifice. She asked me to tell her the real stories, the ones behind the commendations and medals she had dismissed as fiction. So I did, not to prove anything anymore, but to help her understand the person I had become. The quiet sister she remembered had learned to make life and death decisions under pressure that would terrify most people. Emma listened with the focus she usually reserved for corporate presentations, asking technical questions, trying to understand not just what I had done, but how I had developed the capabilities to do it.
She was learning to see military service as a profession requiring expertise rather than just a job for people who couldn't succeed elsewhere. Over the following months, Emma made genuine efforts to understand my world. She read books about military history and contemporary conflicts. She attended veterans events, not as my sister making an appearance, but as someone genuinely interested in learning about service members' experiences. Most importantly, she began correcting misconceptions about military service when she encountered them in her corporate environment. When colleagues made dismissive comments about veterans or assumed military experience was less valuable than business school credentials, Emma spoke up with informed contradictions. The change wasn't immediate or complete. Years of assumptions don't disappear overnight, and rebuilding trust requires consistent action over time. But Emma proved her commitment to being different by making space for my reality instead of trying to reshape it to fit her comfort zone. The Distinguished Service Cross ceremony became a turning point for our entire family. Emma attended in conservative business attire rather than her usual attention-commanding designer outfits, her focus entirely on understanding the significance of the recognition rather than networking with other attendees. Watching her interact with my fellow service members, listening to their stories about operations we have conducted together, seeing the respect they showed for expertise she was only beginning to understand, Emma gained perspective on military service that contradicted everything she had assumed. After the ceremony, she introduced herself to my colleagues not as a successful executive, but as my sister, someone honored to be related to me. The role reversal was complete and genuine, reflecting fundamental changes in how she understood achievement and worth. Our relationship today isn't perfect. We still approach problems differently, value different things, and sometimes struggle to understand each other's choices. But it's built on mutual respect rather than assumptions, on curiosity rather than dismissal, on recognition of different forms of excellence rather than competition for validation. Emma has become an advocate for military families in her professional world, using her business skills to help transitioning veterans navigate civilian career challenges. She volunteers with organizations that support service members, contributing expertise that complements rather than competes with military experience. Most importantly, she has learned that expertise comes in many forms, that courage manifests differently in different environments, and that the quiet people you might overlook could be the ones making the biggest difference when it matters most. The sister who once mocked my fake war stories now understands that those stories represent moments when training, expertise, and courage converged to save lives and prevent catastrophes. She knows they weren't fiction or exaggeration, but understated accounts of experiences most people could never imagine. When young women in her corporate circles ask about alternative career paths, Emma tells them about her sister who chose service over salary, who found purpose in protection rather than profit, who built expertise through dangerous work rather than comfortable advancement. She tells them that success isn't always measured in corner offices or stock options, that leadership sometimes means making split-second decisions when other people's lives hang in the balance, and that the most important recognition often comes from people whose names you'll never know, but whose lives you've saved. The Christmas dinner confrontation that exposed years of family dysfunction became the catalyst for rebuilding our relationship on stronger foundations. Emma learned that her assumptions about people, especially people close to her, could be devastatingly wrong. I learned that sometimes the people who should know us best struggle most to see us clearly. Not because they don't care, but because their image of who we are becomes frozen in time. But perhaps the most important lesson for both of us was that relationships can be rebuilt when both people are willing to abandon old assumptions and start fresh with respect and genuine curiosity about who the other person has become. When Emma introduces me to her friends and colleagues today, she doesn't frame my service as entertainment or curiosity. She introduces me as her sister, someone whose expertise in dangerous situations has contributed to national security at the highest levels, someone she respects and admires for choosing difficulty over comfort, service over self-interest.
The recognition means something because it's genuine, based on understanding rather than guilt, rooted in respect rather than obligation. Emma has become someone I can trust with the truth about my work, my challenges, and my achievements without fear that she'll diminish or dismiss experiences she hasn't lived herself. Our story shows that it's possible to overcome years of misunderstanding and rebuild relationships on foundations of truth rather than assumptions. But it requires humility from people who have been wrong, patience from those who have been hurt, and commitment from both sides to see each other clearly rather than through the lens of past expectations. Emma learned that dismissing someone else's reality doesn't make it less real, it just makes you less informed. I learned that even the most important relationships in our lives require ongoing effort to maintain accuracy and understanding, that people we love can change in ways we don't immediately recognize. When people ask me now about the most important victory of my military career, I don't mention the medals or commendations or strategic successes. I tell them about the Christmas dinner when my sister finally heard the truth about who I had become. When years of dismissal ended with recognition, when a general's voice carried across telephone lines to validate experiences that had been treated as fiction. That victory mattered not because I needed Emma's approval to validate my service, but because I got my sister back, the one who had been lost to assumptions and pride and narrow definitions of success, who had been found again through truth and humility and recognition of different forms of excellence. Some battles are won with explosives and tactics. Others are won with truth and patience and the willingness to let people see you clearly, even when seeing clearly requires them to acknowledge how wrong they have been about fundamental things.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.